February 19th, 1945. ZO5 45 hours. Off the coast of Iwo Jima, 760 miles south of Tokyo. The pre-dawn darkness hangs heavy over the Pacific, broken only by the phosphorescent wake of massive steel hulls cutting through black water. Aboard the battleship USS Iowa, Seaman First Class Tommy Rodriguez from San Antonio, Texas, guides a 16-inch armor-piercing shell into the breach of turret number 2. The projectile weighs 2,700 pounds, more than a small automobile, its polished steel surface reflecting the red battle lights that bathe the turret in an otherworldly glow. The shell feels cold against his gloves, but Rodriguez knows that in moments, this single piece of American steel will carry the combined industrial might of Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Gary, Indiana across 8 miles of ocean to announce democracy's arrival on Japanese soil. The Iowa-class battleship represents the pinnacle of American naval engineering, 887 feet of armored steel, displacing 57,000 tons when fully loaded for battle. Her 9 16-inch guns can hurl these massive shells with precision that would have seemed impossible to naval architects just a generation earlier. Each gun barrel stretches 66 feet in length, manufactured in the foundries of Bethlehem Steel, with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The barbette armor protecting each turret measures 17 inches thick, solid steel plate forged in the furnaces of American democracy and tempered by the determination of free men who refuse to bow before tyranny. 3 miles to the west, Mount Suribachi rises from Iwo Jima's volcanic sands like a malevolent sentinel, its slopes honeycombed with tunnels, bunkers, and gun emplacements that represent 3 years of Japanese defensive preparation. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding the island's 22,000 defenders, has transformed this 8-square-mile piece of volcanic rock into what he believes will be an impregnable fortress. His men have excavated 11 miles of underground tunnels, constructed 5,000 defensive positions, and stockpiled enough ammunition and supplies to resist American assault for months. But neither Kuribayashi nor his soldiers have witnessed the terrible majesty of American industrial power focused into 9 16-inch gun barrels. The 2,700-pound shells waiting in Iowa's turrets represent more than mere explosives. They embody the productive capacity of a continent-spanning democracy that can simultaneously feed its allies, arm its soldiers, and overwhelm its enemies with a superabundance that authoritarian regimes cannot comprehend, much less match. The strategic significance of this moment extends far beyond the immediate tactical situation. By February 1945, Japan's Pacific Empire has contracted to a defensive perimeter barely 750 miles from the home islands. The combined fleet lies scattered across the ocean floor from Pearl Harbor to the Philippine Sea, while American B-29 superfortresses reduce Japanese cities to ash and rubble with methodical precision. Yet Japanese military leadership continues to believe that sufficient sacrifice and determination can force the Americans to negotiate a conditional peace that preserves the essence of imperial power. This delusion rests upon fundamental misunderstandings about American character and capability. Japanese planners have consistently underestimated both the material resources and spiritual resolve of democratic societies at war. They envision American forces as technically proficient, but lacking the warrior spirit necessary for costly frontal assaults against prepared positions. The prospect of massive casualties storming heavily fortified islands, they calculate, will eventually exhaust American public support for continued offensive operations. General Kuribayashi himself embodies this strategic miscalculation. A professional soldier with extensive experience in Western military thought, he has studied American tactical doctrine and industrial capacity with scholarly precision. His defensive preparations on Iwo Jima represent the culmination of Japanese military engineering, a layered system of mutually supporting positions designed to extract maximum casualties from attacking forces. Every cave entrance, every firing position, every supply tunnel has been positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that will turn the island's beaches into killing fields. The Japanese garrison on Iwo Jima expects to die fighting, but they anticipate taking thousands of Americans with them. Intelligence estimates suggest that capturing the island will require at least 6 months of sustained combat, during which American casualty rates will reach levels that democratic societies cannot sustain. The mathematical logic appears unassailable. Even if Iwo Jima eventually falls, the cost will be so prohibitive that American leadership will seek negotiated settlement rather than face similar losses on Okinawa and the Japanese home islands. This calculation fails to account for the transformative power of American industrial abundance. The 16-inch shells now being loaded aboard Iowa and her sister ships represent production capabilities that Japanese planners have never fully grasped. Each projectile requires 400 pounds of high-grade steel, 154 pounds of explosive charges, and precision manufacturing techniques that demand both advanced metallurgy and quality control systems. American factories are producing these shells at rates that exceed Japanese total artillery ammunition production across all calibers. The symbolic weight of each 2,700-pound projectile extends beyond its destructive potential. These shells embody the economic miracle that has transformed the United States from peacetime consumer economy to the world's dominant military-industrial complex in less than 4 years. The same assembly lines that once produced Buicks and Chevrolets now manufacture Sherman tanks and Liberty ships. The precision tooling that crafted luxury automobiles has been retooled to produce aircraft engines and naval artillery with tolerances that German and Japanese engineers struggle to match. At 0600 hours, as the eastern horizon begins to lighten with the approaching dawn, Iowa's fire control systems achieve final target acquisition. The ship's sophisticated radar and optical rangefinders have identified specific Japanese positions on Mount Suribachi with accuracy that would have seemed magical to naval gunners of the previous war. Each 16-inch gun can place its 2,700-pound shells within a 100-yard radius at maximum range. Precision that transforms naval bombardment from area saturation to surgical destruction of individual enemy positions. Lieutenant Commander James Patterson, Iowa's gunnery officer, completes his final calculations as the ship's plotting room transmits firing solutions to each turret. The mathematics of ballistic trajectory, wind speed, target distance, and ship's movement converge into coordinates that will guide American steel to its appointed destination with mechanical inevitability. The democratic precision that governs every aspect of this operation, from shell manufacturing to fire control systems, represents a marriage of individual expertise and collective purpose that authoritarian military systems cannot replicate. Japanese defensive doctrine has prepared for conventional naval bombardment using traditional techniques of area saturation. Their bunkers and tunnels can withstand the relatively light shells fired by destroyers and cruisers, while their dispersed positions minimize vulnerability to the less accurate fire of older battleships. But the Iowa-class vessels represent a quantum leap in naval gunnery, combining unprecedented shell weight with fire control accuracy that can target individual defensive positions rather than general areas. The psychological preparation of Japanese defenders on Iwo Jima reflects their military culture's emphasis on spiritual strength over material advantage. Soldiers have been indoctrinated with the belief that superior fighting spirit can overcome any technological disadvantage. The Yamato spirit that animated samurai warriors throughout Japanese history will, they are told, prove decisive against materially superior but spiritually inferior American forces. Death in battle represents not defeat, but transcendence, a fusion with the eternal essence of the Japanese nation that renders individual survival irrelevant. This worldview has sustained Japanese resistance throughout 3.5 years of increasingly desperate combat. On Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, and dozens of other Pacific battlefields, Japanese soldiers have fought with suicidal determination that impressed even their enemies. The prospect of death held no terror for men convinced that their sacrifice served a divine emperor and eternal nation. American forces have learned to expect no quarter and give none when facing Japanese defensive positions, but spiritual preparation proves inadequate when confronted with the awesome reality of American industrial warfare. At 06:15 hours, Iowa's No. 2 turret elevates its three 16-inch guns to the calculated firing angle. The mechanical precision of the operation reflects decades of American naval engineering refinement, hydraulic systems that can position 1,200-ton gun turrets with minute accuracy, armor-piercing shells manufactured to tolerances that ensure ballistic consistency, and fire control computers that solve complex mathematical equations in seconds rather than minutes. Private First Class Hiroshi Tanaka crouches in a concrete bunker halfway up Mount Suribachi's eastern slope, his hands gripping a Type 99 rifle that represents the best Japanese small arms technology available in 1945. The weapon is well crafted and reliable, but its 6.5mm cartridge seems pathetically inadequate against the American forces gathering offshore. Through the bunker's narrow firing slit, Tanaka can see the dark silhouettes of enemy warships stretching across the horizon like mountains floating on water. The young soldier from Kumamoto Prefecture has spent 18 months on Iwo Jima, digging tunnels, constructing defensive positions, and preparing for the battle that will determine his fate and that of the Japanese Empire. His officers have assured him that American forces, despite their material advantages, lack the spiritual strength necessary for prolonged combat against prepared positions. The coming battle will demonstrate Japanese superiority in the realm that matters most, the willingness to die for emperor and nation. Tanaka's personal equipment reflects the increasing desperation of Japan's strategic situation. His uniform is patched and threadbare, his boots held together with wire and determination. The rice ration that sustains him provides barely 1/200 calories per day, insufficient for the physical demands of combat, but representing the maximum that Japan's collapsing logistics system can deliver to forward positions. His ammunition allocation consists of 120 rounds for his rifle and 2 hand grenades, representing the total firepower available to a single Japanese soldier in the war's final phase. The contrast with American abundance would be shocking if Tanaka could comprehend its full scope. Each Iowa-class battleship carries over 1,200 rounds of 16-inch ammunition, representing more explosive power than the entire Japanese garrison possesses. American soldiers consume daily rations exceeding 3,000 calories, while their equipment includes items that Japanese forces can only dream of: waterproof boots, adequate winter clothing, advanced medical supplies, and ammunition quantities that seem almost wasteful by Japanese standards. At 06:30 hours, Iowa receives the final authorization to commence bombardment. The order comes from Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commanding the amphibious forces that will assault Iwo Jima's beaches in 3 days. Turner's battle plan calls for the most intensive naval bombardment in Pacific War history, 3 full days of continuous shelling designed to neutralize Japanese defenses before American Marines storm ashore. The preliminary bombardment will expend more ammunition than many entire Pacific campaigns, reflecting American confidence that material superiority can minimize casualties among attacking forces. The philosophical differences underlying this approach illuminate the fundamental contrast between democratic and authoritarian approaches to warfare. American military doctrine seeks to minimize friendly casualties through overwhelming application of firepower, even when this requires enormous expenditures of material resources. Japanese doctrine accepts massive casualties as inevitable and even desirable, viewing death in battle as spiritual purification that strengthens the national essence. These divergent philosophies reflect deeper cultural values about individual worth and collective purpose. Democratic societies treat individual lives as irreplaceable treasures that justify any material expenditure necessary for their preservation. Authoritarian systems view individuals as interchangeable components of larger national organisms, making their sacrifice not only acceptable, but spiritually beneficial to the collective whole. The 2,700-pound shells waiting in Iowa's turrets embody this democratic commitment to preserving individual lives through material abundance. Each projectile represents approximately $1,000 in 1945 purchasing power, roughly equivalent to a skilled worker's annual salary. The decision to expend such resources for tactical advantage reflects American society's fundamental belief that no material cost is too high when weighed against human life and democratic principles. At 0645 hours, Iowa's gunnery officer gives the command that will forever alter the psychological landscape of the Pacific War. The battleship's No. 2 turret fires its first 16-inch shell at Japanese positions on Mount Suribachi. The detonation of 2,140 pounds of propellant charges creates a shockwave that ripples across the water like a physical manifestation of American industrial might. The muzzle flash illuminates the pre-dawn darkness with the intensity of a small sun, while the concussion wave that follows rattles windows on ships anchored 5 miles away. The 2,700-pound armor-piercing shell screams across 8 miles of ocean in less than 90 seconds. Its trajectory calculated with precision that represents the pinnacle of American fire control technology. The projectile strikes the volcanic rock of Mount Suribachi with kinetic energy equivalent to a freight train traveling at 200 miles per hour. The explosion that follows sends tons of rock and concrete cascading down the mountain slopes, while the concussion wave penetrates deep into the underground tunnel system that Japanese engineers believed would provide sanctuary from naval bombardment. Private Tanaka's concrete bunker, which had seemed so solid and permanent during months of construction, disintegrates around him like a house of cards. The 16-inch shell has struck 50 yards away, but the shockwave travels through solid rock with devastating effect. Concrete walls crack and crumble. Steel reinforcements bend and snap, and the mountain itself seems to groan under the impact of American firepower. The young soldier finds himself buried under tons of debris, his rifle lost somewhere in the collapsed bunker, his world reduced to a pocket of darkness filled with dust and the taste of his own blood. The psychological impact proves even more devastating than the physical destruction. For 18 months, Tanaka and his comrades have been assured that their defensive positions could withstand any American attack. The concrete bunkers, they were told, could survive direct hits from the largest enemy shells. The underground tunnel system would provide secure movement and supply routes even under the heaviest bombardment. The spiritual strength of Japanese soldiers would overcome any material disadvantage through superior fighting spirit and willingness to die for the emperor. One 16-inch shell has shattered these certainties as completely as it has shattered concrete and steel. The young private realizes, with the clarity that comes only from proximity to death, that spiritual strength provides no protection against 2,700 pounds of American steel traveling at 2,500 feet per second. The mountain that had seemed like an impregnable fortress now feels like a trap, a volcanic tomb where Japanese soldiers will die not in glorious battle, but in collapsed tunnels, buried alive by the overwhelming material superiority of their enemies. The broader implications of this moment resonate throughout the Japanese defensive network. Radio communications, already disrupted by earlier bombing attacks, now cease entirely as transmission equipment is destroyed by shell fragments and concussion waves. Command and control systems that depend on rigid hierarchical structure collapse when key officers are killed or communications links are severed. The carefully planned defensive scheme begins to unravel as individual positions find themselves isolated and unable to coordinate with neighboring units. American fire control systems, meanwhile, demonstrate the technological sophistication that separates democratic military forces from their authoritarian opponents. Radar operators aboard Iowa track the fall of each shell with precision, adjusting aim points based on observed results. Spotter aircraft circling overhead radio damage assessments that allow gunnery officers to shift fire to undamaged targets. The marriage of technology and tactical flexibility enables American forces to adapt their bombardment in real time, maximizing destructive effect while minimizing ammunition expenditure. The second 16-inch shell arrives 18 seconds after the first, this time targeting a different section of Mount Suribachi's defensive network. The explosion creates a crater 40 feet wide and 20 feet deep, obliterating a complex of interconnected bunkers that had housed a full Japanese infantry platoon. The 154 pounds of high explosive contained within each shell produces blast effects that pulverize concrete, twist steel, and turn solid rock into deadly fragments that ricochet through underground tunnels like lethal pinballs. Sergeant Major Kenji Watanabe, a 20-year veteran of Japanese Imperial forces, feels his worldview collapsing along with the mountain around him. He has served the Emperor through campaigns in China, Manchuria, and the Dutch East Indies, always believing that Japanese spiritual superiority would ultimately prevail over enemy material advantages. The machine gun nest he commands has been positioned to enfilade the beach approaches, with interlocking fields of fire designed to stop American landing craft before they can reach the shore. But the carefully constructed defensive position now lies in ruins, its concrete walls reduced to rubble by a single American shell. The Sergeant Major's machine gun, a Type 92 heavy machine gun that represents the finest Japanese automatic weapons technology, lies buried under tons of volcanic rock. His crew of 6 experienced soldiers has been reduced to 2 wounded men who can barely move, let alone operate military equipment. The tactical situation has transformed from confident defense to desperate survival in the span of 30 seconds. The psychological transformation proves even more profound than the tactical collapse. Watanabe has spent his entire adult life serving an emperor he was taught to regard as divine, fighting for a nation he believed enjoyed heaven's special protection. The Bushido code that governed his existence promised that spiritual purity and willingness to die would overcome any material obstacle. Death in battle represented not failure, but transcendence, a merger with the eternal essence of Japan that rendered individual survival meaningless. Yet the reality of American firepower suggests that the emperor's divinity provides no protection against democracy's industrial abundance. The 2,700-pound shells falling from Iowa's guns carry the concentrated productive power of American steel mills, munitions factories, and precision manufacturing facilities. Each projectile represents the labor of hundreds of American workers, the expertise of dozens of engineers, and the accumulated industrial knowledge of a society that has transformed warfare through technological innovation and mass production. The third 16-inch shell strikes an ammunition storage facility built deep within Mount Suribachi's volcanic core. Japanese engineers had excavated the chamber 30 feet below ground level, believing that no enemy weapon could penetrate such depths. The facility contains 10,000 rounds of artillery ammunition, 50,000 rifle cartridges, and 500 hand grenades, representing a significant portion of the island's total munitions stockpile. The Americans cannot know of its existence, but their systematic bombardment of likely target areas demonstrates the ruthless efficiency of democratic warfare. The explosion that follows dwarfs anything previously experienced on Iwo Jima. The initial detonation of the 16-inch shell triggers a chain reaction that ignites the entire ammunition stockpile. The resulting blast creates seismic shocks that register on earthquake monitoring equipment in Japan, 750 miles away. Mount Suribachi itself seems to convulse as volcanic rock fractures and entire sections of the underground tunnel network collapse. The mountain that had represented Japanese determination and defensive strength now resembles a wounded giant, smoke and flame pouring from dozens of newly created vents and fissures. Captain Yoshio Nakamura, commanding the Eastern Defensive Sector, watches his carefully constructed battle plan disintegrate along with his command post. 3 months of detailed preparation, studying American amphibious assault techniques, positioning weapons for maximum effectiveness, training soldiers to operate in the underground tunnel network, have been rendered meaningless by 30 minutes of naval bombardment. The telephone lines connecting his position to regimental headquarters lie severed. The radio equipment has been destroyed by shell fragments, and half his subordinate units have stopped responding to signals. The captain's personal equipment tells the story of Japan's declining fortunes with painful clarity. His sword, crafted by his grandfather and carried through 3 years of Pacific combat, remains sharp and ready. But swords provide little protection against 16-inch naval guns. His field glasses, purchased in Germany before the war, offer excellent optics for observing enemy movements. But the American ships firing at his positions lie beyond the range of any Japanese weapon on the island. His map case contains detailed defensive plans based on the assumption that spiritual strength could overcome material disadvantage. Assumptions that are being pulverized along with the concrete bunkers they were designed to protect. The fourth 16-inch shell impacts directly on Nakamura's command bunker, ending both his tactical concerns and his philosophical confusion in a microsecond of overwhelming violence. The 2,700-pound projectile, manufactured in Bethlehem Steel's Pennsylvania foundries by workers who had never seen the Pacific Ocean, carries the democratic principle that individual lives possess inherent worth that justifies any material expenditure necessary for their protection. The captain's death, instantaneous and complete, represents the collision between two incompatible worldviews, one that treats human beings as expendable components of national glory, another that regards them as irreplaceable treasures worthy of infinite sacrifice. Throughout Mount Suribachi's defensive network, similar scenes of devastation unfold with mechanical precision. American fire control systems methodically work through predetermined target lists, each 16-inch shell guided by radar, optical rangefinders, and spotter aircraft to its intended destination. The bombardment demonstrates not just superior firepower, but superior tactical intelligence. American planners have identified Japanese defensive positions with accuracy that suggests comprehensive understanding of enemy capabilities and intentions. This intelligence advantage reflects fundamental differences in how democratic and authoritarian societies process information. American military organizations encourage initiative and adaptation at all levels, creating systems that can collect, analyze, and act upon tactical intelligence with remarkable speed. Lower-ranking officers are trained to make independent decisions based on changing circumstances, while communication systems enable rapid dissemination of new information throughout the command structure. Japanese military culture, by contrast, emphasizes rigid adherence to predetermined plans and unquestioning obedience to superior authority. Initiative at lower levels is discouraged as potentially disruptive to overall coordination, while communication systems funnel information upward through multiple layers of hierarchy before decisions can be made and transmitted back to operational units. This approach worked effectively during the war's opening phases, when superior Japanese training and equipment could overwhelm unprepared opponents. But it proves increasingly inadequate against enemies who can adapt faster than Japanese decision-making processes can respond. The bombardment continues throughout the morning, each 16-inch shell adding to the cumulative destruction of Japanese defensive preparations. By 1,000 hours, Iowa has expended 60 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition, representing more firepower than most World War I naval battles. The systematic demolition of Mount Suribachi's defensive network proceeds with the methodical efficiency that characterizes American military operations. Overwhelming force applied with precision timing to achieve maximum tactical effect while minimizing friendly casualties. Private Tanaka, partially buried in the ruins of his bunker, experiences a transformation that extends far beyond his immediate physical circumstances. The young soldier who had awakened that morning confident in Japanese spiritual superiority now confronts the awful reality of American material abundance. Each 16-inch shell falling on Mount Suribachi represents productive capacity that Japan cannot match, technological sophistication that Japanese industry cannot equal, and democratic determination that Japanese military culture cannot comprehend. The 2,700-pound projectiles screaming overhead embody more than explosive destruction. They carry the accumulated industrial might of a continent-spanning democracy that has transformed its entire economy for war production. The same factories that once manufactured civilian automobiles now produce Sherman tanks at rates exceeding German and Japanese tank production combined. The precision tooling that crafted luxury consumer goods has been retooled to manufacture aircraft engines, naval artillery, and electronic equipment with quality standards that Axis engineers struggle to match. But the shells represent something even more significant than industrial capacity. They embody democratic values that treat individual human lives as sacred and irreplaceable. Each 2,000 to 700-pound projectile cost approximately $1,000 in 1945 currency, yet American commanders expend them freely to minimize casualties among their own forces. The economic calculation seems wasteful by Japanese standards, where individual soldiers are expected to sacrifice themselves to conserve material resources. But it reflects a fundamental philosophical difference about the relative value of human lives versus military equipment. By noon, the psychological impact of the bombardment has spread throughout the Japanese garrison. Soldiers who had awakened that morning confident in their defensive preparations now huddle in collapsed bunkers, their faith in Japanese military superiority shattered along with their concrete fortifications. The carefully constructed narrative of spiritual strength overcoming material disadvantage has collapsed under the weight of American steel and high explosive. Radio intercepts captured by American intelligence units reveal the extent of Japanese demoralization. The mountain is being destroyed, one transmission reports. Our positions cannot withstand these weapons. Another message, cut short by static, begins, request permission to... before the communication link is severed permanently. The rigid command structure that had provided psychological comfort to Japanese soldiers now becomes a liability, as isolated units find themselves unable to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances without explicit orders from higher authority. The first surrenders begin at approximately 1,300 hours, when a group of 12 Japanese soldiers emerges from a collapsed tunnel system on Mount Suribachi's northern slope. These men, members of an engineering unit responsible for maintaining the underground defensive network, have spent 6 hours trapped in darkness while American shells systematically demolish the mountain above them. Their emergence into daylight reveals men transformed by contact with the overwhelming reality of democratic warfare. Sergeant Ichiro Yamamoto, leading the group of surrendering soldiers, carries a white flag improvised from a torn undershirt. The 28-year-old engineer from Osaka has spent 18 months preparing Mount Suribachi's defenses, confident that Japanese ingenuity could create positions capable of withstanding any American assault. The underground network he helped design was supposed to enable the garrison to resist for months, extracting such heavy casualties from attacking forces that American public opinion would demand negotiated peace. But 6 hours of 16-inch bombardment has reduced his engineering masterpiece to rubble-filled death traps, where Japanese soldiers die not in glorious battle, but in collapsed tunnels, crushed by the weight of volcanic rock displaced by American explosives. The mathematical precision of the destruction, each shell placed with accuracy that suggests comprehensive intelligence about Japanese defensive positions, demonstrates American technological superiority that Japanese military culture had not prepared him to confront. The symbolic weight of Yamamoto's surrender extends far beyond the tactical situation on Iwo Jima. His decision to abandon Bushido principles that had governed Japanese military behavior for centuries represents a fundamental shift in understanding about the nature of modern warfare. The 2,700-pound shells falling from Iowa's guns carry more than high explosive. They embody democratic industrial capacity that renders traditional concepts of spiritual superiority irrelevant. Each surrendering soldier carries personal equipment that tells the story of Japan's declining military effectiveness. Their rifles, though well-crafted, fire ammunition that has been rationed to 120 rounds per man, insufficient for sustained combat against American forces equipped with seemingly unlimited quantities of small arms ammunition. Their uniforms, patched and threadbare, contrast sharply with American equipment that emphasizes both functionality and soldier comfort. Most significantly, their food supplies consist of rice rations providing barely 1/200 calories per day, representing the maximum that Japan's collapsing logistics system can deliver to forward positions. The contrast with American abundance becomes apparent as soon as the surrendering soldiers encounter their captors. American Marines consume daily rations exceeding 3,000 calories, while their equipment includes items that Japanese forces consider luxuries: waterproof boots, adequate medical supplies, and personal comfort items that suggest a military organization concerned with individual welfare rather than mere combat efficiency. The philosophical implications prove as significant as the practical differences. Democratic military forces invest heavily in individual soldier comfort because democratic societies treat human beings as inherently valuable rather than expendable components of larger strategic objectives. By evening, the trickle of surrenders has become a steady stream. Small groups of Japanese soldiers, their defensive positions destroyed and their communication links severed, begin emerging from the ruins of Mount Suribachi's tunnel network. Each group tells a similar story: carefully prepared positions demolished by weapons of unprecedented power, command structures collapsed, supply lines disrupted, and faith in Japanese military superiority shattered by contact with American industrial warfare. The psychological transformation proves as complete as the physical destruction. Soldiers who had been indoctrinated with beliefs about Japanese spiritual superiority now confront evidence of American material abundance that renders such concepts meaningless. The 16-inch shells that have demolished their positions represent productive capacity that Japan cannot match. technological sophistication that Japanese industry cannot equal, and democratic determination that authoritarian military culture cannot comprehend. Lieutenant Colonel Takechi Nishi, commanding the tank regiment assigned to defend Iwo Jima's airfields, receives reports of the surrenders with growing alarm. Nishi himself represents the finest traditions of Japanese military culture, an Olympic equestrian champion, graduate of elite military academies, and veteran of combat operations in China and Manchuria. His tank unit consists of Japan's most advanced armored vehicles, supported by carefully positioned anti-tank guns and infantry units trained in close-quarters combat. But the reports reaching his command post suggest that traditional Japanese military virtues provide no protection against American firepower applied with systematic precision. The 16-inch shells falling on Mount Suribachi demonstrate technological capabilities that Japanese military planners had not anticipated when designing their defensive strategy. Each 2,700-pound projectile carries explosive power sufficient to destroy reinforced concrete positions that were supposed to withstand direct hits from conventional naval artillery. More disturbing than the physical destruction is the psychological impact on Japanese soldiers. The Bushido Code that has sustained Japanese military forces throughout 3.5 years of increasingly desperate combat appears to be cracking under the pressure of overwhelming American material superiority. Soldiers who had been prepared to die for the emperor are instead choosing surrender when confronted with weapons that render individual courage and determination irrelevant. The philosophical implications extend beyond immediate tactical concerns. Japanese imperial ideology rests upon the assumption that spiritual strength, properly directed, can overcome any material obstacle. The emperor's divine nature guarantees ultimate victory for Japanese forces, regardless of temporary setbacks or apparent disadvantages. But the systematic demolition of Mount Suribachi's defenses suggests that divine protection provides no immunity against 2,700-pound armor-piercing shells manufactured in American steel mills by workers who have never heard of the emperor's supposed divinity. As night falls over Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945, the strategic situation has been fundamentally altered by 12 hours of naval bombardment. The Japanese garrison, which had anticipated months of costly defensive warfare, now finds itself psychologically shattered and physically dispersed. The carefully constructed defensive network lies in ruins, its concrete bunkers reduced to rubble, and its underground tunnels collapsed by the systematic application of American firepower. The broader implications of this transformation resonate throughout the Pacific theater. If Iwo Jima's supposedly impregnable defenses can be neutralized in a single day of bombardment, what hope exists for Japanese positions on Okinawa or the home islands themselves? The mathematical logic that had sustained Japanese resistance, trading space and lives for time while hoping that American casualties would eventually exhaust democratic resolve, now appears fundamentally flawed when confronted with American industrial capacity that can produce 16-inch shells faster than Japanese forces can construct defensive positions to resist them. The 2,700-pound shells that have demolished Mount Suribachi represent more than tactical weapons. They embody democratic principles that treat individual human lives as sacred and irreplaceable. American commanders are willing to expend enormous material resources to minimize casualties among their own forces, reflecting societal values that regard human beings as inherently valuable rather than expendable components of national glory. This philosophical commitment translates into practical advantages that authoritarian military systems cannot match: better equipment, superior logistics, more effective medical care, and tactical doctrine that emphasizes overwhelming firepower rather than individual sacrifice. In the weeks that follow, the pattern established on February 19th repeats itself throughout the Pacific. Japanese defensive positions, no matter how carefully prepared or courageously defended, prove vulnerable to American material abundance applied with technological precision. The Iowa-class battleships and their sister ships systematically demolish enemy fortifications, while American industrial capacity replaces expended ammunition faster than Japanese forces can repair battle damage. The psychological impact proves even more significant than the physical destruction. Japanese soldiers, indoctrinated with beliefs about spiritual superiority, overcoming material disadvantage, find themselves confronting evidence that democratic industrial capacity can overwhelm any amount of individual courage or determination. The emperor's supposed divinity provides no protection against 16-inch shells, while Bushido principles prove irrelevant when facing weapons that can destroy reinforced positions from distances beyond the range of Japanese retaliation. The surrender of Japanese forces on Iwo Jima, completed on March 26, 1945, represents more than tactical defeat. It symbolizes the collapse of imperial ideology when confronted with democratic reality. The soldiers who emerge from Mount Suribachi's ruins carry more than white flags of surrender. They bear witness to the transformative power of American abundance applied in defense of human freedom and individual dignity. The 2,700-pound shells that accomplish this transformation rest now on the ocean floor, their steel hulls corroded by decades of salt water, but their symbolic significance enduring through the generations that follow. They represent the moment when democratic industrial capacity proved superior to authoritarian spiritual claims, when American abundance overcame Japanese fanaticism, and when the productive power of free societies demonstrated its ultimate supremacy over the destructive force of military dictatorship. In the silence that followed the guns, broken only by the sound of waves lapping against Iwo Jima's volcanic shores, a fundamental truth about human civilization revealed itself with crystalline clarity. No amount of individual courage or spiritual dedication can ultimately prevail against societies that treat human life as sacred and organize their entire productive capacity in defense of that principle. The 16-inch shells that shattered Japanese confidence on that February morning carried within their steel cores the accumulated wisdom of democratic civilization, that freedom defended by abundance will always triumph over tyranny sustained by sacrifice.